And so ultimately, if I'm wrestling with shame, if I'm struggling with it, if it is starting to take control of my life, the one that can set me free from it is Jesus. I have a certain character flaw. My wife can attest to this because we've talked about it multiple times. But there's something about me where if I get criticized about something, I take that criticism not just about the thing that I should be doing better or could be doing differently or could have done a better job at. I take that criticism as I'm now just a complete failure and a bad person. Let me give you an example. When I was younger, I was playing basketball, had a basketball coach who told me, you don't need to shoot the ball. You need to pass the ball to that guy because he needs to shoot the ball. And I took that as you are not a good shooter. And so for the rest of my illustrious basketball career, I never shot the ball because I was convinced I'm just not a good shooter. That's not what he said. He just said, here in this game, in this moment right now, we need him to shoot because he is a better shooter. And he was. But I became convinced I'm just not a good shooter. Back in my younger days, I was with a bunch of friends. There was music. We were dancing. I got made fun of for the way I danced. You know what? I became convinced I'm not a good dancer, that I'm just terrible at dancing. And which may be true, I don't know, but I just got convinced that that's who I am. Not just in that moment that was, a dumb way to try to dance to the music, but that's just who I am. And I wonder how often we allow that to happen in our lives. That somebody says something, makes a comment, and it might even be accurate. And it's not a criticism of my character. It's not a criticism of who I am. It's not even saying that particular thing defines how I always do that particular thing, and yet that's how I internalize it. That's what I do. I convince myself that I am now, I didn't just fail at that, I am a failure. I didn't just screw that up, I am a screw up. And I wonder how many of us wrestle with that. I wonder how many of us struggle with that on a fairly consistent basis. And I'm confessing that to you this morning. And maybe that's part of why even what we're talking about right now, what we started talking about last week, means a lot to me personally. And I think it means a lot to all of us. We started talking last week about shame and about just the power that shame has over us and how imprisoning it can be. And how shame can really take away our freedom. And how Jesus came to set us free from that. We talked about the difference between guilt and shame. That when I feel guilty or when I feel regret, when I feel remorse, that's different than shame. They're connected, but it's different. Because guilt says that I messed up. Shame says I am a mess up. Guilt says that was a bad thing to do. Shame says I am a bad person. And we talked about that difference last week. And we talked about how the more that we allow that shame and those lies that we believe about ourselves can start to take over our minds and start taking over our hearts and start to dictate our actions and our attitudes. And how that's never what God intended for us. God never intended for us to be consumed by and imprisoned by our shame. That sometimes guilt can be a good thing. It can motivate us to make some changes and do the right thing. But God never intended for us to live lives of shame. And yet that's where some of us find ourselves. Many of us find ourselves. And even if I'm not struggling with feelings of shame in and of itself, I probably know somebody. Maybe somebody that's sitting next to me this morning, maybe somebody in my family, maybe somebody in my neighborhood or coworker that's struggling with a sense of shame. And that's what we want to be talking about, how to break free from the power of shame in our lives. And so again, last week, we talked about how the biggest thing, the thing that can conquer shame in our lives above all else is Jesus Christ. And that's what he came to do. He came to set us free from our sin, from our guilt, from our consequences, and from our shame. And so ultimately, if I'm wrestling with shame, if I'm struggling with it, if it is starting to take control of my life, the one that can set me free from it is Jesus. But I mentioned last week that this week we're going to talk a little bit more about things that I can do The things, the actions that I can take to help me experience and accept this freedom from shame. And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning. How do I access? How do I gain this freedom? What do I need to do to accept and experience the freedom from shame that Jesus offers?